Here we are again with another edition of what I played last month, and gosh dang, was it another month. I started off with Viewfinder, a puzzle game with the core mechanic of taking pictures and placing them in the space around you, causing them to become physical things you can interact with. For instance, if there is a big gap in your way, you can take a picture of a bridge and place it over that gap to get across. For a little while, I was a bit worried that things wouldn't get much more complicated than this, but the game does a very good job of ramping up the complexity as you go along. They introduce a lot of interesting mechanics that I never would have thought of, and all of them manage to fit the vibe and theme of the game. I think what makes or breaks a lot of puzzle games, and honestly I guess most games really, is how they are paced, and I found Viewfinder's pacing to be pretty solid. Each stage shifted things up enough to always keep my brain turning, and its difficulty largely stayed in the window of never being boringly easy while also never becoming annoyingly hard, although it definitely leans closer to the easier side of things. I did sometimes find it tough to get pictures to be placed in the exact way I wanted them to be, but the devs seemingly figured this would happen a fair bit, so one of the other mechanics is a rewind function that lets you jump back to just before you placed a picture. This makes it so you never get punished for experimenting, which is great. Now, my main critique of Viewfinder is admittedly a silly one, but it did have a negative effect on my playthrough. There are various companions who talk to your character throughout the journey, and their dialogue ranges from okay to annoying. The part about it that bothered me the most is that when you complete some puzzles, one of them will say stuff like, "That's a clever solution," and it immediately made me feel like it wasn't a clever solution, as it clearly was what the designers intended for me to do. It took moments where I actually did feel clever for solving something and turned them into ones where I felt the developers were clever for how they designed it. And like, it is true that they are, and they do deserve tons of credit for it, but this game and puzzle games in general clearly want players to feel like they are the genius, and lines like this seem to be an attempt to bolster that feeling, but for me at least it had the opposite effect. To be clear, I don't think this is a good reason to not play the game. It is one of the most creative and engaging puzzlers I've experienced in a while. If you like Portal or any of the first-person puzzle titles that are clearly inspired by Portal, you will really enjoy this. But I do think its use of dialogue is a good reminder that not every game needs it, and if it's not implemented carefully, it can pull players out of the experience. After that, I started Baldur's Gate 3. Typically when I talk about a game in these videos, I've beaten it or I'm at least pretty close to beating it, but that is very much not the case here. I've put in around 20 hours, which with most games you'd think is a lot, but I still feel as if I've barely scratched the surface. I think I might be close to the end of Act 1, but I could be very wrong on that. It's kind of hard to tell. So far though, I am thoroughly enjoying it. I've never really gotten deep into a CRPG before, aside from Disco Elysium, which honestly is kind of a different beast. I did put a few hours into Pillars of Eternity and Divinity Original Sin 2, but got distracted by other games and never came back around to them. I say all this mostly to make it clear that I don't have much to compare Baldur's Gate 3 to, as I lack experience in the genre. So it is possible that other CRPGs have crafted experiences that don't feel terribly off from Baldur's Gate 3, but something about this game does feel really special, and I think that sense is well backed. It has done something that no other CRPG has been able to do, which is to break out into the mainstream. I think there are a ton of factors as to why it has been so successful, but the core of it is simply that Larian developed a deep RPG with a ridiculous and incredible scope that gives players a meaningful sense of freedom. In addition, its presentation is incredible. Every conversation is fully voice acted and animated, which makes the characters and world as a whole feel so alive. While this isn't the first CRPG to have these things, it doesn't seem like any others have gotten anywhere close to this kind of quality, and I think its level of polish makes it look and feel like what most people expect from a AAA title in a way that other CRPGs don't. This helps highlight its best attributes, arguably the most important of which being its cast of characters, who all have intriguing backstories that I constantly find myself wanting to know more about, and cool abilities that make me wish I could have more than 3 of them traveling with me at any given time. They all just feel very D&D. And honestly, that's one thing I really love about Baldur's Gate 3. It actually feels like playing D&D. And I don't just mean because it uses 5e or that there are a ton of ways things can play out. It's more that it has the spirit of what home games often feel like, in that it balances seriousness with silliness in a near perfect way. The stakes are heavy and intriguing, and they push the story and characters forward, but there is also a lot of room for levity, whether that be approaching situations in the stupidest ways imaginable or just having goofy conversations with NPCs. There's just an energy about it that reminds me of playing D&D with friends, and it's cool that they were able to pull this off. Obviously, it doesn't have the same flexibility that actual D&D has, as a real DM is able to adapt in ways that a game can't, and unless you are playing it with a group of friends, no video game can top the magic that happens at a table, but it is the closest one has ever come to it. Now, I will say, while I can clearly see that Baldur's Gate 3 has a ton of potential, I don't feel as if I've seen that potential be fully realized yet. Like, I've enjoyed the robustness of the combat and character interactions, but I haven't really hit a moment yet where I've done something and thought, damn, I can't believe I was able to do that. Given the core mechanics along with some items I've collected and spells I've learned, I think that moment will come pretty soon, and probably be followed by many more moments that elicit the same reaction. But I guess I had just hoped that it would have happened by now. Pushing enemies off of cliffs and placing explosive barrels by big groups is fun, but I want to find some more creative ways to engage with encounters that leave me feeling truly wowed. If Baldur's Gate 3 can live up to its potential, it probably will become one of my favorite games of all time. So here's hoping that happens. I'll update you all as I continue to work through it. The third and final game I played in August was Slay the Spire, which was chosen for me by my patrons. Thank you, you're all chads. I'm not a huge fan of roguelites. I've played a decent amount of them, and while I get that a big reason people love them so much is because they tend to provide countless hours of gameplay where no two runs feel exactly the same, the open-ended nature of them kind of stresses me out. I like when games have definitive endings, where I can walk away from it feeling like I've accomplished what I was supposed to accomplish. And with most roguelites, that's either impossible or takes hundreds of hours, and there are too many games I want to play for me to dedicate that much time to a single one. Because of all that, going into Slay the Spire, I didn't really expect it to be my thing, but as it turns out, it very much is. Most of my favorite board games are deck builders, so it drew me in very quickly. There are so many synergies between cards, and figuring out which ones work best on any given run is wildly satisfying. With the right planning, pretty much every card can be viable to incorporate into a deck, and while I certainly did find myself coming back to certain combinations, it never felt like I was just following a meta. I always had to adjust based on the options I was presented with and find ways to make my deck as effective as possible. Over the course of a few days, I put in around 25 hours, clearing the Spire with each of the characters and beating the Corrupted Heart with Silent. And even though there is a ton more I could do, it felt like a pretty good stopping point. Now, for big fans of Slay the Spire, they would probably consider where I stopped to pretty much be the start of the game, as I quit before engaging at all with Ascension mode. For those unfamiliar, Ascension augments the difficulty by adding additional rules that make things way harder. I think the challenges it presents seem pretty interesting, but I didn't feel all that compelled to try it, partly because there isn't an in-game reason to. Doing it doesn't unlock new abilities or progress the story, it's just a challenge you can do if you want. The motivation has to come from an intrinsic place, which I feel a bit mixed about. On one hand, I kind of wish the game had given me a reason to care about Ascension. Like, I love the way Hades incorporated a similar mechanic in the form of heat. As you add heat modifiers to runs, it not only increases the difficulty, but it also makes it so you can collect certain items again that can be used to unlock weapons and other things, so it feels like a core part of the progression. Had Slay the Spire incentivized me to engage with Ascension by similar means, I would have been far more likely to try it. On the other hand though, if it had given me more of a reason to do it, Slay the Spire would probably be the only game I'd play for the next year, as getting to Ascension 20 with each of the characters would almost certainly take me hundreds of hours. And in all honesty, I'd probably quit at some point, which would leave me feeling a bit unfulfilled. Having it be presented in the way it is let me avoid that feeling of failure by giving me a pretty good spot to end off. All in all, it is a really solid game and drew me in a way that roguelites rarely do. Anyway, that's all I've got. I'll see you in the next one unless I decide to stop doing this. Bye.